Hello and welcome to the StrongCast, where it is our goal to help you perform without limitations. We chat with athletes, experts, and innovators to get their insights in optimizing the movement experience. I'm your host, Dr. Neil Toussaint. Welcome to StrongCast 18. We got Phill Gibbs here. I'm excited. How's it going, Phill?
Very good, man. Thank you very much for having me on. Big fan of what you're doing.
Same, man. Thanks for being on. I'm really excited to talk to you and to break down some of the habits and things that you've learned over the years. And let's just kind of get right into it.
Oh yeah.
So the first thing I wanted to ask you to do is just introduce yourself to people who might not know you. So maybe some of the newer generation, I think, but
Mm.
they need to know who you are, man. They need to know who you are. Like what's going on?
Yeah, well it's that weird kind of turning point, right? Hello, I'm Phill. I'm from Brisbane, Australia. So nowhere near where Neil is, but we've been lucky to meet a couple of times over the years, which I'm very grateful for. We're still in March actually. I keep forgetting, but I've actually been a tricker for 15 years now. I started around like 16, 17. I did martial arts and gymnastics separately when I was younger. Um, Definitely learned some aspects from gymnastics, which was helpful, but the learning environment was not overly positive. It was not the most healthy environment for athletes. And that being said, it is what it is. That's just how it was back in the day, and that's fine. One thing I was really grateful for though was doing martial arts when I was younger too. So I did like two different styles of taekwondo, and I did a lot of self-defense stuff with my dad. Like my dad is probably the biggest inspiration for like everything that I've done. He's the reason why I did martial arts. He's the reason why if I wasn't a tricker, I would have been a drummer. Like he kind of got me like just being like, wow, you're amazing, and like trying to follow his example. So when I did I did about 9.5/10 years of gymnastics, and you would imagine like, wow, it must have been pretty good. God, no, I was not like in terms of the competitive team I was in, not really. But when I was allowed to step out of gymnastics, and I still love martial arts, I was in Taekwondo, and we were like, God, this makes me sound old. YouTube was a new thing,
I
and so
remember.
that's when like, right, yeah, it's like that's when like free running and parkour and tricking was starting to get exposure like more frequently rather than you already had to know what it was. So that's when uh, tricking samplers of like Steve Ferrata and Anise Scherfer. And for those who don't know, they're like very classic OG incredible trickers, which if you don't know them, you've probably seen them in movies or TV shows now because that's what they're doing. And so once I discovered that with a group of friends, I went to a gym close to the city. And then to cut a long story very short, that's where I met some of my lifelong friends like Scott Skelton, the late John McClay, and also Sarah Musk. And then they're like, "You're a weird kid. You seem interesting. You want to come trick with us?" That was 15 years ago. So that's like a really long story cut like very short. But yeah.
That's awesome. Can you
Mm.
imagine like it coming to now, like back then, just walking around?
It was such a weird concept because it's like when I got introduced to this tricking thing, like I was still, me and my friends are still like chucking flips or kind of doing bits of free running when we were in Taekwondo, but we're also like learning it in fight scenes and everything. And then like miraculously happening to go to a gym where at the time, like in 2008, like there was one of the world's greatest power trickers. Me at 16 or 17 had no idea about that. I just assumed like, oh, they're doing double twisting and triple twisting and double flips. That's really awesome. Like I've always wanted to learn this, and I just hit this youthful excitement, which like apologies to anyone that's seen any of my old footage and stuff like that too, but it's like just the insane explosion of vocal whatever you want to call it. It was such that genuine excitement of like, I can't believe I've discovered this thing I've always wanted. I can't believe it's real, and I can't believe people can do this with it. But it was certainly a weird concept where like after finding out that what Scott and McClay and that were doing wasn't just the standard, it was like quite high up there. That was big eye opener. Like, oh whoa, like this is big stuff. And so it was very, very like I got extremely lucky with that. It's awesome.
That's really cool. And I hadn't planned on talking about that specifically, but Yeah, so if you can give some insight into like how the environment you were in shaped your level of tricks in your head, because like if you just look
Mm.
at the internet and you're like, oh, that's the hardest stuff being done, like doubles were being done. There weren't even triple cork back then. So you
New.
think of dubs as the ceiling then. But if you're in an environment
Hmm.
where you're seeing like triple fulls being thrown and just a bunch of like triple corks being attempted as a norm, how does that shape
Mm.
how you grow as an athlete, like mentally?
I
Like,
think
did you think
I
you had
th-
an
mm.
advantage mindset wise with that?
I wouldn't say an advantage in terms of me being mentally prepared for, well, it's actually a really good question. And I think the cool thing about it is that like it is applicable to way more than just tricking. Like I was about to swear, then I'm being careful. It's applicable to like almost any environment that you have a community or a culture of people in. I'm not trying to jump on the whole like let's all be part of a cult kind of deal, but I mean in the sense where it's like being around a group of people that are passionate about their things, and even if it's not in the one direction of we're all doing power and only power, but just everyone being so involved is literally what I'm trying to do right now here back home is like build that culture back up because that's what it used to be. So being in an environment where the level, like you said, where the ceiling was way beyond what I thought was possible, even just in an acrobatic sense, let alone tricking, and then being around it enough, and it just helped build more people to come in and be involved in the sport. But the cool thing about it was, is like that wasn't actually the reason, and that's something I found really interesting. Is like I like being around some of the highest level like tricking athletes in the world, but it's a very small group because of the mindset around it sometimes. And yet being around athletes sometimes that are at the same level and yet they're so welcoming. And it's not a facade, right? They're not trying to like do a sales pitch. They're just honored to share the floor with someone that wants to learn stuff. And that tends to be majority of the tricking culture. Yeah, actually that tends to be majority of the tricking culture. So that environment is kind of what made it easier for myself and a lot of the other trickers to really like push further and excel, if that makes sense, rather
Yeah.
than they're doing the best stuff, I should be doing the best stuff too. So I think just being in that culture where like even me trying a bigger skill, nowhere near at the same level or whatnot when I was 16, and the encouragement I was getting from that group of people, it's contagious. It's such an amazing thing, especially when you know it's organic, right? Like you
Right.
can tell if someone's just kind of milking it, being like, "You're God," and you're like, "Oh, okay." But it's different if it's like a genuine feeling of excitement, and it's like it just brings that the best out of people. And so I'd say that was more the contributing factor. But you obviously can't say that their skill level wasn't a huge part of that too. So
Right.
it's an interesting element of but both of those things and many more, if that makes sense.
Totally. So well said too, because a lot of that, yeah, I mean, you can go into a gym and it could be intimidating, very intimidating. I've talked to,
Hell yeah.
people at gatherings, and I'm sure you have too, that
Mm.
like don't even trick and they kill it at
Yep.
home, but they don't even touch the floor
Yeah.
because they're like, hey, like there's the highest level people here, and sometimes that's an environment they're imposing on themselves mentally, and then sometimes it's an environment that
Yes.
is part of what's going on, and sometimes it's both. Most
Mm.
of the time it's going to be both, and it's
Mm-hmm.
important to like. I had this conversation. One of the I forget what episode it was. I think it was 13 with Jeremy.
Mm-hmm.
Jeremy Price, of course, because he was in Australia for a
Yes, of course.
bit.
Yeah, he's a damn hero. I don't know if you'll see this, Jeremy, but hey, man, good work on the AP magazine.
Yeah, no, he's a legend, and that was the majority of our conversation. Just talk about like cultural aspects of tricking and like how culture is a huge factor in excelling in skill level and just enjoyment. Because, and I know you're huge
Mm.
on enjoying it, not like outside of,
Mm.
oh, I landed this, so now I have like a badge of
Yeah.
honor or whatever. Like it's more about,
Mm.
did you have a great time doing this? I think,
Mm-hmm.
and
I agree.
that's what I want to do with TrickStrong too. It's like it's about the
Mm.
experience. Like it sucks to have something that hurts. So
Yes.
if we can make it hurt less, then you can excel and you can be the best version
Mm-hmm.
and all that kind of stuff. Um,
Well, I'm a huge fan of what you're doing. I know I've said this already, and I'm not just trying to like sing your praises, but it's one of those things that I've found through those who've had longevity in a sport. Best example I can say is obviously tricking, but for those that have been exposed to it for a quite a prolonged period of time, is like quite more often than not, it tends to splinter off into like these different sub categories rather than like I'm going to focus on my physical abilities as a tricking athlete or a tricking practitioner, whatever you want to call it. Whereas like the thing that I have a huge appreciation for yourself and people like you is that like there's aspects of that need to be like needs more attention and needs more information, and especially in a sense of niche movement styles and whatnot. So, like in your sense of actually taking the time to become a damn doctor in that regards and going through the study and the process of actually being able to apply it for those more niche activities. Like my physio here in Brisbane is, I will sing his praises till the end of time because while he's done all the necessary work and everything, he's not bolted down by the I was taught this, it must be this. He's very understanding. He keeps up with the literature. He's also excited about people in the niche because then he gets to kind of see different things that work and be a little bit more experimental without being reckless. And it's like we need people that are willing to make those steps like yourself, because if not, if you're going to tell me that people are just going to be sticking with the traditional style of sport, you're an idiot, because look at what online is doing. Like it's just making it's so massive now that it's like we need people that are willing to kind of look into these things a little bit differently, because there's not a lot of gymnastic skills that you're doing off one leg on a off axis angle or flat spinning skills. We need people to understand all of that stuff. So thanks, Neil. Like we really need people like yourself. But going back to what you're saying in terms of like the enjoyment of sessions and also the somewhat like mental struggles it can be, specifically in because there's a lot obviously, but specifically in this case of being in a session. I won't name her name, but she's a good friend of mine, and so she's been tricking for a long time and she works with me too, and awesome girl. Like finally got to years of training, years of just being stuck at this plateau, but god damn does she grind. And like she then started focusing more on her health and fitness as well as her training. And even though she was very like, that's the thing at the open sessions here, it's not about who can throw down the best. It's about come and share the floor. It's fun. But even with that invitation, like you said, that doesn't make it not intimidating, regardless of how welcoming you make it. If you're like, I can't wait to work on backflip, and there's a dude chucking quad full, you're like, I'm gonna leave now. Like it's just, it makes sense. But like through just like not being forced into it, but just through general like introduction and getting into it and focusing on the things that she could work on, she's been at like the open sessions are getting big now. She's been there every week, spamming skills, pushing harder, almost landing double full. Like it's just, and I've watched that progress over the past like 7 years, or maybe probably around that time. Like
Yeah.
I give way, I'm not trying to completely deviate the conversation, but like I give way more of a damn about that than the skills that you can walk away with. Obviously, I'm not saying skills are useless, or else how do I have a job? But in the sense where it's like what you've been able to work through to be able to work to even just come onto a floor, which was like a small hell at first, is way more important. And you're going to be able to apply that to whatever you need. So yeah, I definitely vibe with what you mean in terms of like, that's not an easy environment, no matter how much you try and make it comfortable. Some people it's just not, and it takes a lot. So it's really satisfying when you see them push through that. It's awesome.
Absolutely, man. Like, couldn't have said it better. And that's what the flame is actually in the logo of TrickStrong. It's like
Yeah, really?
the flame is supposed to be like spreading that fire to other people and to your surroundings, you know what I mean? And then the outer
How did I
circle.
not know that?
Well, I'm telling you now. There you go. Telling everyone now
Love
because
it.
I'm sure almost no one knows it. But the enzo, the outer part of the flame, like so, there's the flame, and then there's a circle around it. It's an enzo. It's a
Yep.
Japanese calligraphy, and it stands for strength. Well, the circle can stand for a lot of things. It stands for strength. It stands for unity. It all, but the reason I picked it, yes, those things, but it's also because when you do calligraphy, you're doing it at the time. Like it's a in the
Yeah.
moment thing, you know? And no circle is going to be
Yep.
the same. And that's a big part of like the
Mm.
Enzo is that anytime you draw it, it's going to be a little bit different because it was imprinting that moment, you know?
That's so awesome. I didn't think of that at all. That's sick.
Yeah, so like it's really cool when we can imprint those moments on people and in our environment and create stronger, more resilient individuals that can tackle the things that they want to in life. And that's the goal. That's the goal, man. So,
That's it. 100%. That's
yeah.
awesome. Whoa, I have way more respect for that symbol now. Not that I like, obviously, it's not like I didn't think about it at all, but it's like in terms of the flame and whatnot, because that's the other thing with like when it comes to like oh God, if there's one thing I'm not very good at, it's like business and ideas like that. And so I understand that like logos and branding is an important thing, not in the sense of just being like, buy it because it's got a fire and fire is cool. It's like, what does it actually stand for, right? Like
Right.
sometimes symbols are just simplistic, like, holy crap, man, mine is very simplistic. But in the sense of like where it comes to like that flame and the unity of the circle, unless you explained it to me, I would have I guess the other beauty of it as well is that people can draw their own conclusions. But the fact that there's such a specific tie-in with that and how like universal that is to yes, we can relate it to like tricking and physical sports, but it could be applied in almost anything that you can think of is really thoughtful. I did not think of that at all.
Thanks, man. I don't know. This is probably like it was a while of thinking and brainstorming, and actually Trisha had helped
Hmm.
me design. Like I had the logo in my head, but I'm not an artist, so I had her draw the first one, and then
Yeah,
more recently it's been like revamped and all that. So
hmm.
yeah, yeah. No, I appreciate it. But
I love it.
the next thing I want to kind of move into is similar topic, but I want to get into the head of how old were you back in like the prime of the insane sessions you guys were having, like with the
Mm,
just like the insane throw in really hard tricks. How old were you about?
it's I'd say like obviously when it comes to that, there's like specific time frames where it's like things would be down for a while and they'd be due to like
Right.
injuries or whatever it is. Which again, like
Yeah.
no way, like of course, like look
That's
at
what
what
I
we're
want to
doing.
talk
But
about.
absolutely, so it's like when it comes to at that point of a consistent kind of building up of skills, I would definitely be around like it's funny because I can kind of splinter the question off where it's like the consistency of around I'd say 2000 and like the very end of 2011 right up until like 2014 and whatnot was just like gradually building. It's like I was understanding movements more. I was understanding trying to define my own way of wanting to move into skills,
Mhm.
adapting what I learned from guys in Brisbane, like Scott, John, even a couple of the other guys back then, where it was majority like swings, double flips, tumbling, things like that. And then the more creative and even the more kick based things that I got from some of my best friends in Sydney. My very first introduction to tricking instructors were like two of the first trickers in Australia, who you've obviously met. So Morgan and Jono. So those were
Mhm.
the two first tricking instructors in the country, to my knowledge. And they really paved the way because like yes Morgan was doing power skills at the time, but he was moving in ways that I'd never seen, and same with Jono. Like Jono could do double falls and double corks and stuff like that, but that was not his primary focus really. Like he was doing such cool stylish moves, and so having that blend and trying to kind of establish that in my own way started around that like end of 2000 kind of 2011, but definitely picked up more a bit further along. Funnily enough, like, and I use this as an example to some people who understandably fall into the trap of, well, I'm older than that now. I can't do that now. I'm too old. It's like, first of all, there's a friend of mine called Mateo, so don't worry too much about that because like he landed his first like double double when he was living with me and my family when he turned 30. So don't stress about that. And also my I'll never forget like the best tricking session I've ever had was when I was 28. So you don't want to jump down the whole, well, I'm now past 21, so prime's over. It's like not really. But yeah, so I'd say that bracket of time was definitely when I was able to push towards bigger things and had more control and awareness and power to an extent. By today's standards, it's nothing. But I also understand that like I'm old now, so it's a different time.
Man, I would watch your samplers so much, man. Especially the Way to Dawn. I remember that one. That one was like, so everything he's saying is lies because there was a B twist trip in that one, I think, right? Was it that one?
not weighted.
What's the one with the
No,
beats with
that's
Trip? I'm pretty sure.
maybe it was weighted
I think it was because
dawn.
I'm a fan. I'm more of a fan than he is. But
I love it.
we'll
I
check
appreciate.
on it. We'll check on it.
Yeah,
But
I should. I definitely know that when I landed my first beats with Triple Cork was the very, very last tricking session of 2011. It was the very last one I was in Sydney. And so I actually wouldn't have even attempted it if it wasn't for my friend Tim, who, for those who've done tricking, Tim Farley is the world's first cork in back out. Like that's a big deal. That's
yeah,
huge. But like he was doing beats with swing and he was like, "Oh, do you want to try it?" And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, everything else is feeling pretty good, so I might give it a shot." And then like it started working and then started getting close and I was like, "Okay, like if I push, unlike what I usually do where I'll try it 2 or 3 times and if it's not working, I'll do something else because I don't want to waste the session." But I was like, "How about you give it more than 3 shots, Phill? Like you might actually get this if you commit to it." And
yeah,
thankfully it worked. But yeah, I get to talk about this every now and then. It's like Way to Dawn was like inspired by a my huge franchise I grew up playing and called Kingdom Hearts. And so
mhm.
one of my favorite characters, Riku, has a weapon called Way to Dawn, which is the tattoo on. You can't really see it well, but like
Nice.
that weapon that's on my forearm, like if you see it in photos and stuff, like it's that weapon's called Way to Dawn.
Nice.
And another fun fact about it is that like the song or the main song that I used in it was from a band called Dance Gavin Dance, like back a song from like back in 2008 or whatever it was. And then years later, like 2015 or something, myself, Muskie, a friend of mine, Matt, like we actually, and a couple of 2 American trickers, we went and saw them play in Brisbane. Um, Met up with them afterwards because they were just having drinks downstairs with everyone like normal people. And we were like, "Oh my God, this is sick." Couple of
Nice.
drinks in, and Muskie's like, "You should show them your sampler." I'm like, "I really don't want to do that." And they're like, "You should show us." And it's like, showed them this. I'll never ever forget this. Like, watch the like. I showed the drummer, and then I showed the screamer, like the unclean vocalist, and he like looked down at my phone and looked at me. He's like, "Is this you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." And he's like, "Yeah, we've all seen this already." And I just like sat back and I remember Muskie and my friend, his tricking name is Barnabas, but his real name's Garrett, just like looked at me, just in both in as much shock as me. And I just remember the first words I said to him, just in such like giddish boy terms, was like, "No, no, that's impossible." And they'll just and then they're just like, "Yeah, no, dude, we all watched it. It was really sick." And I was like, "Oh my God!" So like, Way to Dawn is really cool in that regards in terms of like how did it get to that point? Like, so I was very
Yeah.
grateful for like that. So yeah, no, I appreciate that you enjoy it too, man. Like that does mean a lot because it's like it's not like I can do any of that stuff now, or not to the same extent. But I also understand that's not actually the point. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, man. No, that was awesome. And like, I guess what I want to get to with that period of time is just in talking to you and a bunch of other Australian trickers and everything, and seeing the videos, like you said, if you're watching the first video from them with headphones on, just turn it down. Uh, so you guys
Yeah,
are
yeah,
going
yeah, yeah.
ballistic, like for real, like
Yes.
ringing the skill
Hmm.
bell every session, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Um,
I forgot about the skill bell.
I feel like I was there, you know. You got like
Yeah.
slamming energy drinks, all this kind of stuff. I don't know how
Hmm.
many sessions. There were obviously injuries with training in that way. Are there?
Correct.
Can you give us some pros, cons, cautionary tales about that period
Yeah,
of time?
exactly.
Yeah.
I think I did a video on that for Kojo's Trick Lab a few years ago, which I just called it like cautionary tales of a has been, which is like
Nice.
an accurate statement in the sense where it's like, look, like, and Scott would be the first to admit it as well, because it's like I was a bit reckless with it, but I certainly, oh man, Scott, I don't think you'll ever see this anyway, but like, man, that guy, like, there was one session where like his life was at risk getting on the floor, and I'm not exaggerating, and he
I
still got on the floor. And I was like, bro, you need to calm down, like, because I'll cut the story short, but like, because I'm not trying to throw him under the bus. He's one of my
no.
closest friends, but like, he was trying to do 540 cartwheel full in back out. So back in 2011 or 10, that hadn't been done yet. Nowadays, people are doing full in back outs at a bloody scoot. But like at that point, that hadn't been done in like a tricking combo. Tumbling had been done, yes, like Trickers doing it into tumble passes, yes, but not from like a kicking skill leading into it. And so he tried it 3 times at one session, and he landed some of them really bad, like on his side kind of thing. And then he started getting really sick. He thought it was something else, and then turned out later that he punctured his lung to a certain degree. And if it was 2 millimeters, he told me this, and Scott sometimes can exaggerate stories. So I was like, okay, I'm sure it's bad, but it might not be as bad as what he's saying. But he mentioned it's like, if it's 2 millimeters bigger, it fills up with fluid, and then I'll drown on land or die, basically. And I was like, okay, that doesn't sound good. I'm not sure how bad it is.
Yeah.
And the thing that really made it like cement with me was like because I was still too young to drive, I think. So like I got dropped off at Scott's place, and his dad, Don, like came up to like 17-year-old me and just like said, because Scott was just going to come with us to the session to watch or chill out. But yeah, like Don grabbed my shirt and was just like, if he gets on the floor, you tell me, because I'm going to fucking kill him. And I was like, oh my God, okay, this is real. Like, so Scott is actually at a huge risk here. So to deviate back towards the question you were asking, yeah, we weren't the smartest of people. So when it came to like caffeine intake and things like that, obviously, like, and I talk to my students about it now. It's like, look, like, you're going to figure those things out. I'm not going to be a dad here. Like, you'll probably have like caffeine. This is cool. And then you'll have way too much of it, and then it won't do much. Like, that's kind of something that I want anyone that I work with or any friends, like, to develop that on their own. It's the same with anything substance wise, where it's like, you just need to make sure that you're being safe about it. If it's getting too much, then I'll pull the reins. But other than that, like, I want you to figure out those things on your own, because we had to do that. In regards to injuries and whatnot, yes, part of that also is definitely one of those things now where it's like, when you are trying skills at a level that isn't at that stage, it was still quite new. And so yes, testing those things out are important. And but one of the things that I'm extremely grateful for, and with anyone that I work with, I really try and put it out there with everyone, which is like, use your resources. And that's one thing we definitely always did, myself especially. Like, when it came to, because one of the biggest skills that was terrifying to me starting tricking was a double backflip. Like, I just could not imagine understanding how to do that. I could not imagine how much power you'd need to produce. It was beyond my understanding. And so one of the grateful things about it, being in the environment that we spoke about before, where that was being done on the regular, and that obviously desensitizes you to how, not in a negative way. I shouldn't say desensitize. I should mean, like, it brings up the actual opportunity of, oh my God, it doesn't have to be this unachievable, terrifying thing. It's very doable. I just got to do it right. And then using the environments that we had, like using the trampolines, using the resi, which, like, if you've seen the samplers, it was that thing in the corner that we were always landing in, and like using the foam pit. And so it's like, having the resources, even when we were like reckless idiots, we still were applying that first up. So it was never to the point where it was like, have you never done it before? Don't think, just feel, and like do it like that. It was always, there was that concept of like, look, there was a lot more hype then, and that was a good thing too, but you could also fall prey to it. So the only thing I'd say in terms of like cautionary tales is like, when you're trying to figure out what works best for you before training or after training in terms of rehab and recovery, experiment with different things, because a lot of those things change over time. Some ways in a good way, other ways in bad, whatever. But when it comes to like working up towards bigger skills and whatnot, apologies for swearing again, but sometimes the fuck it and chuck it approach isn't always the best. So I'm grateful for the injuries. That, I know it sounds like a really weird thing to say, but it's like, I am grateful for the experience that the injuries have given me rather than the injuries themselves, because it's definitely educated me in ways that being told about wouldn't. And while I don't wish injuries upon anyone ever, that would be a terrible thing to say or do, I also understand that some of the people who are the most mature I've spoken to, who are or were athletes, have gone through something in order for them to be able to bring that forward into their lives, whether it's they're still an athlete or not. There's a maturity and a grounding that they've learned from that. And so I'm grateful for what that's been able to present me, especially with my role as like a full-time coach. So sorry if that deviated a little bit all over the place, but I hope that answers the question.
No, that's awesome. And then like also you teased, or just to tease out a little bit further, like you guys use different surfaces. You had a really good community, people that knew how to do some of the skills that you guys were trying to do. And did you use like tutorials much at all, or do you?
Funnily enough, not really.
Yeah,
At that stage, it was more so like the expo because, and I feel like you could relate to this as well. Where it's like, yes, back in the day, there were the really iconic websites of Tricks tutorials, which then became Trick Session, and that was like an incredible source. However, for majority of users, including myself, like a lot of us kind of use that more to share what we'd been working on, more so than looking up the tutorials specifically.
yeah,
There also wasn't as much content out there in tutorials, and that's not a bad thing. Again, tricking isn't exactly that old, really.
no.
Um, and so when it comes in Australia, it's like definitely less than 25 years old, I'm pretty sure. So
Okay.
that's not long. Oh, so 30 years if I'm going to be generous. And like that's not long for any sport lifespan. So when it came to tutorials and whatnot, you're right. Like having people at a high skill level, whether they were intentionally teaching or just through demonstrating their own training alone, it's funny how much people can adapt and learn from just being in that environment rather than sitting down sometimes and being told. So when it came to like learning skills and whatnot, it was more about like the exposure of what we got to see online, chatting to different trickers across the world, because now that the internet didn't take 5 years to load up, we can now
Yeah.
have conversations with other people and see their YouTube stuff and get in contact with them. And so that was more prevalent rather than looking up specific tutorials, if that makes sense. And there's certainly nothing against that, because now that we can do that, we can get that information out there way more efficiently, and we can articulate it way more. And especially with what you do in terms of like showing exercises and how they can be applied to different things, it's like, oh, thank you. Like that it's such a help. Sorry, I know I keep saying that too, but
No,
like
I
we need
appreciate it.
people like you, because it's such a helpful thing that like it just wasn't really around, at least not for like the kind of things that we were doing at the time, or nowhere near as accessible or reliable. So,
Yeah.
cheers, man.
No, thank you, and I appreciate it. And like, yeah, it's all just stuff that we wish we had when we were coming up, and that's what generations do, right? Every generation should be doing
Right?
that for the last one. The next one takes the
Mm,
torch, you know?
yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So moving on. So I wanted to talk about your ACL injury. When was
Mm.
that? I'm trying to remember what year that
So,
was and how that happened.
what's terrifying is that like I did a podcast, a jam podcast a couple years ago,
Yeah.
with Travis.
Yeah.
I need that man to be like at my wedding or at my eulogy, because he knows more about my life than I do. Like he had, when I did my meniscus injury, he knew the clip of it. He
Yeah.
knew the month I did my. I'm just like, bro, like it just couldn't. Sorry, that just reminded me.
No,
Then I
that's
was like,
funny. Yeah.
how the hell you know more about me than I do? So, I did my ACL at my own event, which I was kind of just doing like a workshop, mini gathering kind of thing. I believe November 2019.
Okay.
Oh, yes, no, that's correct. And so I wasn't really in the right headspace. I had power on that session, but I wasn't really like, I'm sure not just in tricking, but in any athlete or any kind of sport, people can relate to sometimes where it's like you may be at a facility or where you need to be doing it, but you're not present. And so I definitely was not really present at that point. My body was able to move okay. And so I foolishly only planned the first trick into a combo. I was like, well, I already done, so I did side swipe, and then for those that don't know what tricking is, it's like this upside down kick thing. And then after I did that, I was like, okay, well, I'll just go into this other acrobatic skill, like a touchdown raise into a triple full. And so when I went into it, I was on this axis that was slightly off. And that's the sneaky thing about ACLs is
Hmm.
majority of the time it's an off landing, not so much like a bad crash. Like if you completely mess up a trick and you just land on your side, like you can be like, oh my everything. But after that, you're pretty good. Whereas like ACLs or knee injuries is more often from like that off axis. And so all I did was just come down and land on this weird axis, and I felt something, but I This sounds like a really weird thing to say. I consider myself kind of lucky in that regard because what followed afterwards was not excruciating pain. And the reason why I say that is because I've been around a couple of people who have done their ACLs like in person. And it's like when I did mine, I kind of stood up straight away, but kind of like, like whimpered like a wailing lady to the side of the floor. But it wasn't like, oh my God, I can't move. This is the worst pain I've ever felt. I need help straight. I just like, get off the floor, Phill, wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. And I just kind of moved to the side and like knew I'd done something. Like I was like, I know this is a big one because of previous injuries and exposure to it, but I can still get off the floor at the moment. So I just got to the floor, put my leg up, iced it, and just cheered on the rest of the session because people were still throwing down. Like some of the best in Australia were there doing like, I think my friend Byron was doing like round off double full in back out onto like a mat. So I was like, forget my knee, do your thing, forget my knee. Like it's just, and it was awesome. So in that sense, I got lucky but unlucky. The next day I went to just a hospital and went and saw like the hospital physio. And so I don't get upset about that kind of thing because he misdiagnosed me. But the problem with it is as well, it's like, look, man, I get it. Like I came to you about 24 hours after I did it. There's a fair bit of swelling in my knee, and you couldn't scan it. So all he was doing was like the kind of physical tests, like doing the movements, doing the pulling, doing the testing and stuff like that. And what he gauged from that was that my ACL was still intact. Chances are it's MCL, potentially a bit of meniscus, but because of where it is and everything, there's a chance that you most likely won't need surgery. You'll just need to go through this. And I was like, okay, cool. Thankfully, just because of getting messed up so many times over the years, I'm also very comfortable in admitting if I want more information on something. Because, like I said, through no fault of the physio, unless they've mastered X-ray vision or an MRI has been loaded into their brain, they can't see what's inside my knee. So after about a couple of weeks, I was like, look, I'm going to go to my doctor. I'm going to get referral to get an MRI because I want to know what's wrong for sure. I don't want to speculate. And I'm very glad I did that because when I went and got the MRI, what's interesting about it is that like the MRI actually was more painful of an experience than when I snapped my ACL.
I'm sure.
Which is really weird.
Oh, you mean like the physical aspect of it?
Like yeah, like actually, not the mental, like
Okay.
the actual yes. So the physical aspect was really weird because all I had to do was just keep my legs straight, like there's a platform under my knee, keep my legs straight, and just don't move for 5 minutes, just so they can take the photos. That, like, I don't know how old I was, 28, 29, 29, I think, whatever. As a almost 30-year-old man being brought to tears just by trying to keep my knee still. Like it hurt so much. Like, and it started tremoring and it started shaking because after I'd snapped my ACL, I hadn't kept my leg straight since then. I just always had it bent or had it supported or was on crutches or whatever it was. So having to hold it straight, that really hurt. And then not long afterwards, they're like, well, everything else is good. Unfortunately, it's your ACL and it's a full rupture. And I was like, okay, well, at least I know, like, I've been around people that have done this before. I understand the process of it. So I then went into doing my own prehab stuff, saw my physio, got the surgery, tried to be as cautious of it as I could. So mentally speaking, I was fine in the sense where it's like, I've dealt with injuries before. I've been around people that have been through severe injuries, even worse, like a good friend, Nick Vale, who I'm sure most people are aware of. It's like, yes, fair enough. Like an ACL is not a small injury, but it's not like that's never happened to anyone ever. It's like, this is quite common in the sport that we do. Don't be an idiot, Phill. Do this properly. You will be okay. And so that was kind of how that went.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's such a good perspective to have because it can always be worse, unfortunately. And that's very, very true. Very true. I mean, there's been many people in the past that have gone through what, some people listening might go through. And that's the whole point of this kind of thing, to give the insights of
Hmm.
like, okay, yeah, so this is what you did, cool, cool. So like at least, okay, maybe what you said earlier was perfect because you were like, well, if you haven't been through the experience, you're not going to learn as well as if you're just hearing about it. Like, of course, we all recognize that, but how nice is it
Mm.
to at least be able to call on somebody's experience right when it happens, be like, oh, cool, I know what to do, I have that covered, I know how to
It's
best handle
exactly that.
this. Yeah, and that's
It's
what we're trying to do
exactly
here.
that.
Yeah.
It was that confidence, knowing that not only just friends from overseas as well, but also friends that I was in communication with, like, be them like my friend Jordan, who is like the redhead kid in Way to Dawn, who like runs up the thing and gets hurt. Like, I've known Jordan for like 20 years. He's done both of his ACLs. Like, he's come back from that. He was getting ready for bodybuilding competitions. Like, so it was a good thing. Not that you ever wish for someone to get hurt. I know I said that before, but I mean that. It's like, if you wish that upon someone, that's a bit of an unhealthy mental state. But it's having the confidence in knowing, I've been around people. I've seen. I've also. I don't mean this in a rude way, but I've also been around people who have been irresponsible with the injuries. So,
Yes.
and that's, you can't pretend that does not happen. It happens in any. It doesn't even have to be sport. It could be a workplace injury that requires some kind of medical intervention, whether it's surgery, whatever it is, and they just haven't applied it. Or, and I hope this hasn't happened to you yet, Neil, but I know this is a thing in physios where they're like, I'm hurt, you fix it. And it's like, that's not how this works,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Like, you can provide them with the tools, you can provide certain elements of relief, but it's up to them to be able to process the recovery well. And I've been grateful with my environment because, funnily enough, I didn't mention this before, but it does also help, where it's like, for a couple of years there, my dad and our family, we ran a health and fitness center. So my dad opened up a gym. And so being in an environment around like that kind of thing, and I was still too young to really take it in, but now being older, being like, oh, that's where that must have come from. And so understanding, it's like, you are doing an extreme sport. The chance of you getting hurt is pretty damn high. So if you approach the way that you are, like, approach your training to your recovery, you're going to be mentally and physically in a much better place than you are being like, I'm hurt. Damn it, that's all right. I'll just pay for the surgery, let it do its thing on its own, see a physio, and then they'll fix everything. It's like, you need to be responsible for that. Now, that's my perspective, and that's what's kind of been helpful for me. But I can't say that that's what everyone's done, and that's fine. Like, people have to learn, right? So I kind of had the experience of, when I was around people and what I saw when people treated their rehab sensibly and what they were able to get back to and what they were able to do from that, even if it isn't in the sport anymore, even if they're like, okay, I've recovered, I don't really want to go back there anymore, I want to do this instead. That's fine. Still have respect you like for that. That's great. But I've also seen the elements of what people do if they don't give a damn about it, or they don't treat it properly, or they rush the process, or whatever it is. And so here's a goal, or here's the ideas of like, that's awesome, I kind of want to do it more towards that. Here's the stuff I kind of want to stay away from, so that doesn't happen. So having that was very helpful.
Definitely. And then there's also,
Mm.
just to for the viewers, there's also the person that
Mm.
gets back to what they do fully.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
yeah, sorry, I should have explained that as well. Where it's like, I
yeah.
mean, the best example of that I bring to example is, like, I know I mentioned him just before, but like Nick Vale has, like, to my knowledge, one of the worst tricking injuries ever, maybe even one of the worst knee injuries of any athlete that I'm aware of. So, not speaking globally because I don't know, but like,
No, it was
from
very
from my
severe from a medical
it
standpoint. That
was,
was very severe. What he
yeah,
went through.
like
Yeah.
to the point where like he had like a team create a surgery for him, essentially, is just, that is a sentence. And so, yeah, like, seeing him go through the recovery of that, and I'll just never forget, like, seeing something on my phone years afterwards of him doing like another triple cork, and I was like, you're kidding, you don't even, you're doing triple cork off a leg that, and for the viewers, I don't want to get too graphic here, but you just did a skill off a leg that potentially wasn't going to be there anymore. Like, that's how severe it got. And that's like, that man could do anything. And so that was a really cool inspirational thing, not just for myself, but globally as well. So yeah, it's like that guy, if you're going to tell me like, oh, I just kind of did a couple tornadoes afterwards, it's like, no, bro, the dude could have had his leg removed from his life and stepped back into doing like big stuff again for the time that he wanted. That's awesome.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And like, so as far as you and your own training and like, how are you feeling since that recovery, since your ACL recovery? Like, how did it go? What have you learned from it? What do you do now? All this kind of stuff. Like, yeah, I would like to learn from your surgery.
No worries. What's funny about it now is that like, and I guess I when I've asked people about this too who've recovered from ACL, they're quite similar. Where I've done damage to both knees. No way. Yeah, tricking, man. It'll do it. But what's funny is the leg that gives me more issue is my meniscus and my cartilage leg, which is my left knee, more so than my ACL. Now, the ACL obviously is a more severe injury in the sense of the ligament itself, but once that was recovered and the process that I followed through, because like I said, having the example of what I don't want to be doing and having the example of what I want to be doing, and also having access to an incredible physio, that made the process a lot smoother than what it could have been. And so I'll admit, like, I certainly didn't rush getting back into tricking because I know what that can do.
Yeah.
I'll admit at one point and I'm glad that I read the signs, because once I'd done my ACL, I'd already been tricking for a long enough process to kind of understand when it's okay to push, and then also understand if your body is saying, dude, what the hell are you doing, to listen to it. So I remember when I tried my first triple fall after my ACL, and like I landed and then fell backwards, and that was just due to like not doing it for a while and everything. But I just remember there was a very clear indicator when my body's like, okay, buddy, like, not yet. And I was like, cool, yep, nope, no worries. Didn't try another one for like a couple of months afterwards, and there was no question whether it was strong enough. So it's one of those weird, I'm not trying to sound super spiritual to people where it's like, you gotta listen to what the spirits are saying. I'm like, no, like, your body can actually give you some pretty clear indicators if you're willing to listen. And it's weird because it doesn't speak English. Like, it's this weird thing where you've got to try and listen to the signs of it. So in terms of the ACL recovery, I took a lot of time, and thanks to like the training of my physio, as well as my own discipline with my fitness training as well. Like, I'd already been implementing that into my training too, besides tricking. A little bit too much for a period of time there. So I'm glad that's kind of tapered off a little bit, because that was a bit unhealthy. Like, I was doing 9 workouts a week and 4 tricking sessions a week. And that was a bit too much. And so like, yes, that was good for the time. That was also more of like a mental thing for me to go through rather than just the physical aspect. But I'm glad that I was able to take things from that experience and develop it later into a more stable and beneficial method. And so now with my training, even with my ACL, I'll do 5 workouts a week. And nowadays I trick a little bit less because my focus is elsewhere, but I'll go more into that later. But in the sense of like, I'd already developed that discipline of like my health and fitness training. And so applying that to physio was not difficult. Like, that was something where it's like, this is important. I need to be able to learn to walk again. So I need to make sure that I'm doing this properly. And I'm glad that the one thing that I'm very grateful for, and I can understand why this gets a bit different with people, but at least I wouldn't get frustrated, if that makes sense. I understood that this is a process. It's the same as tricking. It's the same as learning anything, where it's like, like, when it comes to recovery, very, very rarely, almost excruciating, like, I can't imagine many examples, is a recovery very fast. Like it's like the process is just like simple treatment, you're good to go. Maybe like muscle tightness and bits of fatigue, sure. When it comes to a injury, very rarely is it a quick fix. And so I wouldn't really get frustrated with that, because I was able to funnel my concentration not only into my physical rehabilitation, but also in terms of my actual real passion and goals, which was my coaching and doing things like that. So because I had the mental stimulus and the physical stimulus together, I wasn't getting frustrated of being like, why can't I do those tricks again? It's like, because you can't walk, idiot. Like, do this you're still doing things. And so that's an easy process. I found that an easier process, but I'm not naive. I understand that that's not easy for everyone, and it's very simple to get frustrated, and it's very understandable. Funnily enough, with the ACL now, because I had my operation in, oh man, when I had my operation, it was the worst timing. Like when I had my ACL op, and then a week and a half or 2 weeks after that, I had to host ATG 2020. And
Jeez.
so, and the reason why that was more stressful is because there's usually a team of three of us. It was myself, Jono, and Muskie. Muskie was working that entire week. Jono was moving the day after. So it's me on crutches trying to do the best I can. Probably the weakest link of the organizers
Wow.
being like, okay, let's just stay in the pool, like just trying to do what I can to help with the gathering while I can't walk. But it was the worst timing in that regards, but it still turned out not too bad. So that in terms of the recovery of the ACL, that went rather smooth. The issues that I actually have more nowadays is with my left leg, and because in tricking, for those who aren't aware, we majority of trickers have a preference of the way that they do their movements. So for me, I twist towards my left, which means that when I do a lot of the swing throughs or the single leg skills, I jump off my left leg. My left leg hits the floor and my right leg does a lot of the swinging. So because of 15 years of doing like running into my J steps and like planting that leg on the floor, just due to wear and tear, the cartilage damage, and also the meniscus, that injury has been more frustrating to deal with and has had more long-term effects than the ACL. So that's been more in terms of the recovery, trying to build that to a point where it was like okay to do whatever the level of tricking I was trying to push towards. And so yeah, very long answer to a very simple question. Sorry.
No, no, no. I love it. And like, before we get into your coaching, because that's a huge thing I want to talk about, I wanted to just try to dissect if you feel like what exactly you're doing right now for your knee, that or either one or both, that you feel has really been useful to you. Like what kind of training
Hell
you're
yeah.
doing that helps out a lot with
Yes. Absolutely, because that's been like, especially when it comes so with my training stuff, the way that I've scheduled it as for what works best for me and the time frame that I have is um of the 5 workouts or sometimes 6 workouts that I get to do a week, 2 of them will be legs. One of them will be based on mostly just the weights training stuff. My goal is not to lift heavy. I am a little fella, Neil, and I do not need to be lifting heavy for what I want to be doing anyway. It's more about building the strength and foundations within my legs so that they can handle the brunt of things. So especially because I have a hamstring graft of my ACL. And also, I didn't know this until my dad mentioned it to me years ago that the Gibbs family has genetically weaker hamstrings.
that.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Wow.
So,
Interesting.
yeah, so focusing on like building the strength just with the general movements of like compound movements and things like that. And also just building some of the like helping with some of the imbalances with especially my meniscus because that leg is the one that isn't as strong. And so like the goal is not to make it exactly the same strength. That's not what I'm trying to achieve here. I'm just trying to focus that there isn't a huge imbalance. Slight imbalances is just kind of inevitable, especially with the sport that we're doing. So doing that, but the second legs training that I do is more predicated on dynamic movement. So I wasn't really doing a lot of that for a couple of years because I thought like I was just doing enough of it in tricking, which to an extent is kind of correct, but nowadays focusing a lot on building the rehab back up, especially post operations and stuff, is doing a lot of like the box jumps, the directional hopping, a lot of the different like what was I going to say? Yeah, basically those kind of plyometric explosive movement stuff. And then towards the end of that workout, a little bit of compound movement still, but majority it's like weights based. The easiest way I put it to myself is like the weights based legs training, and then the like body weight legs training where it is more about like producing my height, producing my balance off axis and landing safely and things like that. So not exactly tricking skills, but not too dissimilar to the stuff that you posted, but nowhere near as in depth as what you're doing. So that's kind of what my like second leg workout is based on. And that's been very helpful because even if I'm doing little bits of tricking now, like at least I know that my legs can handle that, and they're used to being jumping around again and used to going on that off-axis stuff, rather than just building the strength of them, but then trying to apply it plyometrically by doing tricking. Bits of it can connect well, other bits it's just super helpful. So yeah,
couldn't agree more. A lot of times, you can make it through a side swipe, whatever, for years and years, but you always wonder why, if you do too many of them, my shoulder hurts or my hip hurts or like my lower back hurts or whatever. And it's like, well, that's a sign that there might be a weak link there. And that if you can address it with some of these drills that you're talking about, that's a good way to plug that up and prevent any future stuff. So I completely agree with your where you're at right now, like mindset wise, as far as like, oh, let me do that preventatively. Let me try to mimic things without doing the actual skill. Like that's another thing.
Yeah.
Too. It's like there's a skill component, then your head's completely there. It's not necessarily always going to be like, oh, let me land as perfectly as possible. It's like, I got to think about 3 twists and the setup and the kid running around behind me. And unfortunately, like your environment.
It's so accurate, right? Like when you're focusing on the skill itself, that's where your attention is and where it should be, rather than like, am I doing this box jump perfectly? And can I do a cork like I do a box jump? It's like with my single leg box jump, sorry. It's like, it's not going to be the same thing. Right. But like, there's something I know it's your podcast, but there's actually something I wanted to ask you.
Please, yeah.
I've had to have this discussion with a couple of friends, some students, not too many, but a couple of them. And I like your expertise in this because you are far more qualified in this than I am. But I found like I've had to wean a couple of people off certain kind of training styles because, like, look, man, I'm as big of a fan of Dragon Ball Z as anyone else that was born in the 90s. But it's not like Piccolo where you wear the weighted cape and clothing and then fight in it and then take it off and you're like, God, I'm weight leader now. Wow. It's not. So I've had to kind of warn, like, one of my friends in particular was like trying to train. This is years ago. And to his credit, I get where the concept was, where it's like he's wearing ankle weights while doing corks, like trying to do cork swings with ankle weights. And I explained, I was like, man, love it. Loving the Piccolo thing here. Loving the Rock Lee, take them off, drop down, explosion, sick. But that actually isn't going to really improve your skill in corkscrew. If anything, it's just causing more of a risk. So what I wanted to ask you is, first of all, is what I'm saying even remotely correct? Because like I'm saying that with confidence from what I understand, but I'd like to hear it from someone who is a doctor in this and also a tricking practitioner. And also in regards to, I've tried to, like, would your suggestion be leaning them more towards like the exercises that incorporate that movement without the risk of the skill with additional weight? Like that's kind of what I was saying. Like, that's kind of what I wanted to ask. Like, have you had experience with people doing that? And what's your recommendation? Because I'd like to know myself.
Absolutely. You're right. I would not recommend that, especially with like a weight.
Okay.
If you're using a weighted vest, using a vest is like a good amount of weight. If you were to do something like this, which there's limited benefit to doing it, but if you were to do something like this, I would say between 5 and 10 pounds, like max. And the reason why, it's so funny because people are doing this with the best of intentions. They're just trying to be better.
Absolutely. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
That's the first thing I want to tell people that ask me. It's like, hey, like, I understand your heart's in like a great place. You're trying to get better. You're trying to improve your skills. Like, no hate or anything with that. But
all for it.
But there's several reasons why you shouldn't do that. The first reason is pretty obvious to most people. Like, your joints will experience a lot of that force. It's not like tightly onto your body necessarily. That's why I say like something lighter that like can be worn might be a better option, but even that hasn't been really studied. That's just like instantly increasing your weight without increasing your muscle mass. So there's so much to unpack here actually. But if you increase your body weight by 1 pound, your joints experience that weight increase by like 3 pounds. It's by a multiplier. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Walking, for example, is multiples of your body weight through every joint that you have. And then if you run, that gets up to 10 times. Doing certain
Wow.
gymnastic skills and stuff are like 13 times body weight when you land.
I guess in the sense of like force applied and everything, that does make a lot of sense. But like if you're adding, because that's also another thing that I realized, like even when I was in gymnastics as a kid, and even seeing some of my friends who are in gymnastics facilities now and training and everything, if they are doing anything with ankle weights or even weight, not very often they have weighted vests, but even when they do, the exercises are very controlled. It's like if they're doing it, if they're doing leg raises holding onto a bar with it, or if they're doing with a weights vest, it might be box jumps or it might be rebound, like just your rebound jumps or whatever it is. It's very controlled exercises, as opposed to I have never seen any, and I'm using gymnastics because that sport is quite applicable to what we're talking about, and it's also, let's face it, it has had many more years to kind of put more like of the understanding of like the science and the physics and the biomechanics behind it, right? So
Totally.
not once in my 31 years on this earth have I seen a gymnast wear a weighted vest while doing a floor routine or doing a beam routine or doing anything like that. Exercises using the apparatus, yes, like leg swings just on the floor, but very controlled, never any specific like acrobatic exercises. And I imagine that it was the case in terms of like it wasn't going to be productive. If anything, it was going to cause more of a risk of injury rather than improving like your ability to perform the skill once you've like adapted. But I didn't realize it was to the extent that you just said. That's terrifying to think about, that my friend was trying to do cork swings with something that's like more than 13 times the pressure on your joints. Jesus Christ.
Not only that, there's more. And I would say that this might even be a bigger factor that could convince somebody more not to do this.
Right.
Motor control, motor learning. I actually took a course in that in physical therapy school. We're very big on educating physical therapists to educate clients, so we need to learn how to learn. How do we learn? How does the body learn? How does the mind work? How does the brain communicate with the body to learn skills and retain skills, all this kind of stuff? The skill is being changed too much when you're wearing a weighted vest for you to translate it properly.
True.
It's too different.
The
weight, like the gravity doesn't work that way. Gravity doesn't work in focal points. So now unevenly you're being, people think that a weighted vest is just adding mass to their body as if it was like, oh, I just added,
I put on weight myself.
Yeah, let's say even fat so that it's not a useful weight, right? Okay, even if you got like 10 pounds heavier, that would be a better, much better for the skill than just having weight in a like very specific spot. So for that aspect as well, it's not even doing what they think it's doing, and there's a risk of injury. So I just wouldn't even bother doing it. Yeah.
Awesome. Sorry. Thank you. Like I know it's your podcast, but I wanted to ask you as well for someone that's like actually educated in this, because it's like, yes, I have an understanding of those skills, but I will never lie to someone if I am not qualified, if that makes sense. So it's like, look, I've done tricking for a long time. I've gotten hurt a lot. I can speak from experience, but I'll always recommend in terms of like when it comes to certain things, speak to someone that is professional, speak to someone that is actually qualified. And so appreciate it. So as long as I know that what I'm saying to like clients and friends is not just me being like, don't be Piccolo, you're not a Namekian, like actually just explain to them being like, I love the idea of what you're doing, but unfortunately it might actually be having an adverse effect to what you're achieving. And it's better that you know that rather than just being like, oh, I don't want to be rude. It's like, no, I kind of want to save you from wrecking your joints unnecessarily, because it's not like we're not putting enough pressure on them already. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, totally. And like the most, just going off this because I like this topic, because there's a lot to learn from it for everybody. When you work out, what you're trying to achieve is not necessarily I mean, yes, you're trying to indirectly improve the skill, but if you're not
Yeah.
if you're not training the actual skill, then you're not training the actual skill, and you have to recognize that, and that's fine. Like,
Yes.
my
Yeah.
goal with certain movements is a Nordic curl. What does that look like? Doesn't look like a backflip. It doesn't look like anything, but it's going to help with all those things because your knee has to be able to flex. And
Yeah.
so thinking about like, oh, hip flexion, elbow flexion, shoulder flexion, strengthening these movement patterns. Well, that's like a joint specific pattern. And then you have movement patterns like squatting, pushing, pulling, hinging. And those are even smaller, or those are bigger movements, but they're still not quite a trick. A trick is like 5
Right.
movement patterns at once. And so what you're trying to do is strengthen the movement pattern so that when you get to the movement, it's strengthened, like your muscles are strengthened, but your neurological system's also strengthened. And like you're trying to, so certain exercises might be better geared towards strength. Others might be better geared towards power. Some might be better geared towards endurance or coordination or athleticism. And recognizing what each one is doing is a valuable thing, because a lot of times people just want to throw it away because it's not the exact trick, but it's like, well, like, wait a minute.
Right.
If you had a stronger hip, you'd probably get around faster. So it's combining both of those. And that's why I love, like what you were saying before, you have a strength day and then you have like a dynamic day. And like, that's actually pretty similar to how I design a lot of the programs on RX and for my clients. It's like, yeah, you have to train different qualities, different days. You can't train every quality in one session. You can't just like train tricks and expect that you're getting your weak links taken care of. You're not.
Right.
Because like, they're weak links.
You did make sense, right? Like I thank you. So yeah, I love this. This is just such amazing stuff to hear, because like I have a big passion for this thing as well. And while I may not be as educated, I like to try and learn as much as I possibly can, especially from a trusted source like yourself. Like it's another thing as well, where it's like I had another friend, funnily enough, who was like trying to implement workouts and fitness regimes to help improve their tricks. And through same concept of love the idea, love what you're trying to do. If you are trying to better yourself, why would I talk you down? That's a great thing. And just anyone doing that is an awesome thing. I don't care what you're trying to do. But like you're saying, the other thing you want to make sure is, like, if it's someone that you know or someone you're in connection with, or definitely a client, you definitely want to make sure that it's one of those things. Just like my job is to guide you with knowledge that can help influence your ideas, or your structuring what it is you're trying to achieve a little bit more accurately, so that it's a clearer resolution of what you're doing. So the reason why I bring that up is, yeah, it's like, and yeah, right.
That's
like,
why you're the guy.
That's one of the things I was thinking about. Is like, one of my other friends was like training a lot in the gym, and it was awesome. Like, he was training hard to get stronger. The problem with it, though, was that he ended up training in terms of putting on a lot of mass, and then was wondering why the skills were a lot harder. And it's like, look, I get that you're trying to train too, and that's good. But the problem with it is that it depends on what your goals are. So being able to like give that resolution to them is so awesome. And like the way that you just brought that all out, man, like bigger fan of you now. Love it.
Yeah, it's important to learn how to use the tools. It's like just putting gas. It's like having a Ferrari, and then one of your wheels is like not moving in a circle. It's kind of like off to the side a little bit. That's fine for like a mile or two. You want to show somebody, hey, look, I can go to 0 to 60. It's like, look, oh man, that was dope. I don't know what that rattle was, but man, that was sick. Then on the way home, you break down.
Such a good way of putting it. Dude, that's sick. I know what that rattle is. It's my meniscus. That's awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's such a cool thing to be able to help people connect those links to an extent as much as possible, or even if you can't, guide them to trusted sources that can. And that's something that I've been very grateful for with my experience with tricking. And like, I don't know, I still don't quite grasp why, but I've been very fortunate that I've been able to travel, like, in a sense, the world for tricking. Like, I've been able, not everywhere, you get what I mean, but I've been able to travel a lot because I'm on a freaking island that's nowhere near anyone. And so I've been really lucky to be able to like go and get exposed to that. And through that knowledge and through those connections, like literally this conversation here is a perfect example where it's like, I can now be like, here's someone that I want you to talk to. I know them. I've met them. I know that they put in the work. They're a trusted source. Please go and use that outreach for people to talk to people like yourself and whatnot. Cause it's like, that's really important because I've been exposed to not necessarily, well, some are trickers, but not many, but a lot of people in different atmospheres where it's like, I'm the guy you only need to see, only come to me. I will provide you with the information that you need. Don't go elsewhere. And it's like, I get that in a sense of a business or anything like that, you need to do your best to keep clientele coming through. I get it. When I was younger, I'd be like, oh, are you being selfish? It's like, no, okay, look, like if it's your livelihood, it's in your best interest. But yeah, I have a big appreciation for being able to outsource people for things that I think are very important, if that makes sense. And so, yeah, it's good having those connections.
That's what I'm doing here with the podcast. That's exactly what I'm doing with the podcast. I'm trying to get as many minds on this topic as possible so we can help people as best as we can. Because it can't all just come from me. I mean, like you've had experiences. Everybody that's been on these things have had experiences that are unique. And even if they were the same, you're going to articulate it in a different way. And the 20th time someone heard something, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, okay. I really will start to take care of X, Y, Z. Or I really will like, oh, that does sound familiar. Man, he had a very similar experience. So like, that's just how people learn. And yeah, for better or worse, like just, or not better or worse, but for just a different perspective, for the sake of having a different perspective, that's a huge value in it, in outsourcing, you know?
I appreciate you letting me be a part of it. I know I keep saying thank you, but like seriously, thank you.
Thank you for being here, man. Like appreciate it. So yeah, you know we're getting towards the end. There are a few things I really want to hit. So let's go a little rapid fire.
Sorry, I'm taking too long.
No, not at all. I love the amazing way you put stuff. It's making me laugh a lot, honestly. I'm trying not to be audible so people can hear you, but I'd be like laughing really way louder otherwise. But what are you doing besides the workouts and stuff? Like, are you doing anything in recovery, self-care type things? Like, for example, an example could be like sauna use or cold plunge or foam rolling or yoga, things of that nature. Like, what do you find is the most helpful in your self-care routine, recovery routine?
So for me personally, because I obviously need to taper that in with like my working schedule, because like I haven't actually been lucky enough to experience something like yoga yet. And I've been sworn by many friends and trickers that it is amazing. And so it's certainly not because I'm not interested. It's just for my schedule and for what I'm able to do, I can only do the best that I can, right? So besides implementing my workouts, and then I don't get to trick as often anymore, which is my decision, by the way. It's not like, oh, why? It's like I chose that. So when I get to trick, that's one thing. And then when I get to do my physical training, but when it comes to the rehab side of things, I am on a roller quite constantly. Like not for like hours at a time. Genuinely, I use roller more so for like a light warm up before I go and do a workout, before I go and train. In terms of my static stretching, that's taken quite a big step back over the years. And I find myself only doing stretching holds and stuff once I finish training, or if I'm not training later or whatever it is. I definitely incorporate my dynamic stretching a lot before workouts, but definitely before tricking. Like it's just the most primary source of like what I need to be able to do in order to get my body moving and ready for the kind of movements I'm going to put it through. So but I don't spend hours doing it. So it like if it's right before a tricking session or a workout, it's used as my warm up. Unless of course it's my leg jumping day where it's the whole bloody thing. With rehab side of things, when I get the chance, I try to make sure that I can go and get treatment from like my physio or someone like just a general massage or whatever it is. But with my time frame, I don't get to do that as often as what would probably be recommended. So I've definitely taken on to having it's not weird actually, it's becoming quite normal. Like I find myself having more cold showers than anything else, especially at the end of the day, because that's just kind of helping like myself feel refreshing and kind of helping like just with getting the blood flow going through my body very quickly after a session. So that kind of alleviates any kind of tension, at least for me anyway. It feels like it works. But in terms of rehab or prehab, whatever you want to call it, either of them, before a session, bit of rolling if it's a weight session, bit of dynamic stretching if it's before tricking or a dynamic plyometric based workout. Static stretching, not as much, only a little bit throughout the week. I roll each time, and cold showers usually do me favors. So basically that's like not super structured, but it's not like I don't do it every day, really.
Yeah, nice, cool. Thank you. Appreciate it. And then next, any supplements or anything that you're taking that you've noticed any crazy improvements with?
Nothing that I'd say I'd noticed crazy improvements with in regards to, just because it's like a lot of my physical training, both tricking and fitness stuff, is a lot about maintenance stuff. So I'm not going in there and doing way heavier. It's kind of staying along the same line, which is my goal anyway. It's just to kind of keep that going, and that's been really helpful. So with that, in terms of supplements, I am having like bits of fish oil. I wouldn't mind getting something a little bit better than that, but vitamin D and magnesium has been quite helpful. With other stuff, it's usually like my protein powder, and I also try to have like as minimal sugar as possible, just in terms of dietary things. That's also because of a genetic thing that I have as well, where it's like I need to be a little bit careful with blood sugar. So while I'm not diabetic, I need to make sure that, like, because of the genetics, like if I have a lot of sugar, which I haven't had a lot of sugar in a while, like it can spike up quite a bit. So my doctor's like, you're all good, just be mindful of it. And I was like, sweet. So besides that, I have like my protein powder and creatine as well. But it's like I'm a fan of creatine. It's good. Once I run out of that, I'll just go without it for a little bit, and then I'll restock and get that. But that's basically it. I don't have as much, like I don't have pre-workout very often. I have coffee, or like sometimes I'll have like a pre-workout, like a small one that you can just get at the gym if I'm doing a bigger session. But my caffeine intake is definitely, well, it's still, I'd say, probably on the higher end, nowhere near as much as what it used to be when I was like overtraining or like trying to make a fort in a gym and then like kick it over and things like that. So basically that.
Nice. And so let's talk about your coaching. So like how does that go? How did it start? Do you coach tricking? Tell us all about your coaching.
So I got really lucky in the sense that it sounds odd, but I also understand that there's kind of a stigma with it, where most people get to that point where they're like, well, when they can't do it anymore, they just become a coach. And so while I understand there's a stigma there, what's actually interesting about it is that like I have more confidence and more ability as a coach than I think I ever did as a tricking athlete. Nice. And so that doesn't mean I'm like, God, I'm really good. It's like, no, I feel like I'm more competent as an instructor and can help people and that way better than I can be like, look at the tricks that I could do. It's like, cool, whatever. So when it came to coaching, like what's funny about it as well is that like when I was younger, and I mentioned this towards the start of the podcast, my coaching being brought up in gymnastics was not great. And that's, again, I'm not going to be like, it was a terrible thing. It's like they were doing what they knew, and they just knew to be angry all the time. And so with that perspective and the perfectionism kind of thing definitely stemmed in from that. Martial arts instructing was fantastic. Like that was a really good environment to be in. I don't really have any qualms with that. That was awesome. But like, I remember when I was younger and I was just doing gymnastics coaching on the side while I was in high school, I remember kind of saying like, I'll never forget saying this to my mum at one point when I was like, Mum, the last thing I want to be on earth is a coach. And now like, that's my full-time career. The cool thing about it though is that like when I found out what tricking was and started becoming a tricker and was like, oh my God, I can do this thing. I can be myself. Like I can be an idiot. And yet portray what I'm trying to get across and help people in this. And they're having fun. I'm having fun. They're learning skills. We're all getting together. Like there's so many positives for this. And so it's funny how like the experience of something that wasn't really enjoyable younger was able, from just a simple flip, was able to become this thing where it's like, yep, I could do this for the rest of my life. Like now that being said, it is also a job. So I'm not going to naively be like, you never work a day in your life if you're doing what you love. It's like, you sure? Because I've definitely had days where I've had kids like, if I was able to rewind time, God, I hope this doesn't get me in trouble. If I had the gift to rewind time, like do like a quick time skip, I'd love to just say things to them and then just rewind time so they have no idea. So, or just like kick a kid. So, okay, don't put that on the podcast. But like, in that aspect, it's like, yes, it's still a job. There are still aspects of it that are not going to be fun. That's work. That's what it is. But I would like, I get to take some of my, like, because of my connections through tricking and the traveling I've been able to do with it. It's like, I now am in a position where I get to take some of my students over to Japan this year. Like that's
awesome.
I just didn't think I'd be able to do things like that. And it's lovely to be able to give back. Like, so when it came to coaching, when I was able to step into that role and did it for a little bit through this place where Scott and me and the others were training at, and then they actually passed me on to my current employer. And it was just at a kung fu place, and they were just looking for someone to help with their tricking and acrobatics for like an hour class on Saturdays. And after a while, it was like, this is going good. Like it's starting to pick up numbers. Wow, Phil, would you be interested in doing a little bit more work? It's now been 11 years. I now work there like almost full time. I run my own business now where I teach clients both in person and online, and I can run it through the facility Red Dragon because I've worked there and helped build that business. And so I'm able to do my things as well. And so I also do, so like my work now, full-time coaching is like, I coach at the martial arts place. Like essentially I'm there 6 times a week, like not always doing their classes, but coaching the classes, which is a combination of tricking, and they do XMA, but I'm more on the tricking and run the floor, and the other guys do the XMA side of things. And then I do support work as well, where I take care of clients that are in Australia. We have something called NDIS, which is like clients that have special needs, or they need physical care, or social workers and things like that. And so I get a couple of clients who like are on the spectrum of autism or things like that. And so I still can't believe that I get paid for this. Like they meet me at where I work at Red Dragon. I will take them through tricking for a bit. And one of the clients I've been working with for the past 3 years, it's 3 hours. 2 of them I get to teach him tricking stuff, and 1 hour I get to play Nintendo Switch with him, and that's part of my shift. And I was like, "Are you sure that's okay?" I was like, "You sure that's okay?" I'm like, "That shouldn't be allowed." But like, after being with it for a while, I understand that that's a really important part of like the development in terms of like socially building those things. And like now he's like, he's like a little brother to me now. It's awesome. And so like, thank you. And so like getting that aspect of like that plus support work plus my own business, which is teaching people online and in person. Now I'm in a position where I can survive comfortably. I'm not just scraping by being like, I have one meal for this week. It's like, no, I can live quite comfortably. I can put some money away. But I do have a bit of a weird thing, which I'm hoping won't end up being a huge problem as it progresses. But now that I'm in a position where I'm starting to earn more, my initial response to it is, what can I do with this money that can go towards like the trickers or help them out? And so now like, bit of a segue, but something that's happening is like, I'll be sponsoring some athletes soon. So I need to figure out how that works. And like I said, taking my students to Japan, and I'm running an event this year, and like getting merch and trying to do all those things to give back now that I'm in a position that I can. So while my tricking training itself has taken a big step back, not so much due to injury, but also just in the sense where my body's reaction is starting to slow down. And also I'm way more interested and focused on this aspect than I am being like, you reckon you can B-twist triple cork again, Phil? Come on, for good old sake. I'm like, okay, cool. Like there are people doing double B-twist triple cork now. Like that's, I want them to have their time. I've had mine. And so very long answer, sorry again, but that's kind of where it started. That's kind of where it's at now, and that's kind of what I want to be doing. So busy, man, really, really, really busy. So worth it though. But yeah.
That's awesome. So like, I mean, and we're gonna do this again right when we end. But how can people coach with you? How can they just DM you on Instagram? Or?
Yep. Basically, if you just contact me on Instagram or Facebook and whatnot, and so then from there I can kind of, because what I like to do, especially with my online clients, both international and whatnot, is like we organize doing calls, but I type up a block of training for them, and so the idea is like, here's the things focused on, because the goal of it kind of came through with COVID as well, where it was just like, look, I still want to be able to help people. This is a good idea to see if this will work, and it kind of just built from that, which has been great. So I'm not swimming in international clients, but that's not necessarily the point. It's just nice to be able to do kind of what you're doing literally now, which is like have that outreach to kind of give more info. And so it's like, instead of it being, because there's not a lot, but there's already platforms that are amazing with content, like Kojo's Trick Lab and yourself. It's like there's so much content, but in different things, right? And it's very much a different perspective of people, whereas what I'm trying to do is a little bit more personalized, in the sense of I'll go through with a client individually, like this is what you do for your physio, I would imagine, where it's like I will go through individually those specifics of what you're trying to do, the things that I've noticed you need to work on, not just this is how to double full or something. It's like, these are the things you need to focus on. These are some drills that you need to do. Here are some goals that I want you to work on. And here are some extras, because that's something I've had a lot of fun doing with clients too, is like, there's your stuff. This is the primary. Here's some extra things that with the style of movement and the way that I see you do, you can start doing, so that when the inevitable happens, when you get to a session and you just can't think, or you just don't really want to be trying the same thing you've been doing over and over again, do these extras so that at least you're leaving the session or doing something with that time. And so, yeah, it's been fun. It's fun trying to like learn different ways to work.
That's awesome. I do the extras as well. I literally call them extras.
Yeah. It's good, right? Because it's like, it fills out the time. Like that's not even just the purpose. It's like, primary goals are an amazing thing to have, but there's some other stuff that you might be missing here that you might not even realize are really fun, or they might come back years later being like, oh, wow, I kind of played around with that. And so, yeah, the extras are like goals. They're great.
Yeah, and then in the case of physical therapy and stuff, and recovery and performance, and like sometimes you might just be at a gym and you're done training and you're like, oh, I still feel pretty good. I kind of want to do something else, and like, oh, let me hit up my core real quick or something. Same thing as what you're like, oh, let me hit up some groundwork before I leave the session, same type of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
exactly
that's really cool. I love it. So any last piece of advice or anything like that for anyone listening that we went through a lot, but like, is there anything else that you want people to leave with that has helped you shape where you're at now, helps improve your life or your tricking experience?
First of all, apologies for such long answers, but secondly, what I would definitely say, and I know I said this earlier in the podcast as well, but like, please don't be afraid to use your resources. Like, stretch out to people, even if you do have trusted resources. Like, the beauty and the curse of the internet, I suppose, is that there's a lot of information, and a lot of it is not productive, but some of it really is. And some of those bits that you can find if you find a trusted source, like Neil, for example, is that like someone that actually gives a damn and actually wants to help you, as opposed to using you to help build their platform. And I understand that that is a difficult trap to kind of weave out. So word of mouth is a big thing. So if anything, use your resources. Don't fall guilty to the traps of, if you're seeing people achieving more than you, that you're not doing much. Small steps in the right direction is so much more impressive than trying to push towards something obscure immediately, and if it's not working, to give up. It's like, trust the process, go to trusted resources and just keep loving it. Basically, whatever it is, keep loving it. That's it.
Nice. Love it, man. Love it. Where can people find you if they want to get more of your content or connect with you for coaching?
Best case would definitely be on my Instagram. So I can share with you either of my links. I have my personal one and also my business one, which is the business one is Phill Gibbs Tricking. I really don't want that to be the name of it for too long, but again, it is what it is. It has been helpful in that regard. But yeah, anything on Instagram or Facebook as well. If you just find me, my name is spelt with 2 L's, unlike what my email suggests. So if you just type in Phill Gibbs on Facebook or either like Instagram is probably the easiest, but either of those, just let me know. And if you want to learn some tricking stuff, have any questions, hit me up. Be awesome.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you so much. It was a great time
You too.
talking. Great catching up, and I hope to see you in person soon. That'd be nice.
Yeah, that would be incredible.